Hi, I'm Mireya. For 7 years, I paid every bill in my sister's name. Rent, food, vet emergencies, you name it. I called it support. My family called it normal. Then the day I lost my job. She laughed. That night, I walked out. And by morning, I had 25 missed calls. Not one of them asked if I was okay. Just why their cards weren't working. But what hurt worse than their silence was realizing they hadn't just ignored me. They'd erased me. What would you do if the people you love treated your generosity like a subscription they forgot they were stealing? Would you keep paying, or finally unsubscribe? The soft whirring of the old fridge was the only sound filling the kitchen when I flipped the coffee maker on. It was still early, barely past 6, but I liked the quiet before Callista's day began. Or more accurately, before she opened her bedroom door and swept through the apartment like she was doing it a favor by existing in it. I moved around the kitchen on autopilot, pouring grounds into the machine, glancing at the sticky note on the fridge with the utilities breakdown. Rent. Paid by me. Groceries. Mostly covered by me. Internet. Electric. Streaming services. My name was on every bill. I paid, she stayed. That had been the unspoken agreement for 7 years now. At first, it was temporary, just until she got back on her feet. Then it became tradition. Then expectation. As I rinsed my mug, the sink groaned like it too was tired of this arrangement. I dried my hands and peeked into the living room. Her gym bag still sat untouched by the door, where it had been for 3 days. I almost laughed. She hadn't been to the gym since the Obama administration, but the illusion mattered more than the truth. I checked my email, scrolling past work memos, then paused at a calendar reminder. Brunch, Sunday, 11 a.m., Mom's. I sighed. Another family get-together, another day of pretending we were all closer than we were. Still, I baked something, because that's what you do when you're the daughter who wants peace. Chocolate banana bread. Her favorite. The next day, we drove in silence. I offered to drive because Callista's car hadn't passed inspection in 2 years, and she didn't trust Ubers. She hummed along to the radio while scrolling her phone. At one point, she turned and said, "Let's not make today about you needing recognition, okay?" I didn't respond. I never do when she sets the tone like that. It's easier not to waste breath arguing with someone who always speaks last. At Mom's, the house was already buzzing. Cousins I hadn't seen in months, Dad chatting with someone from his bowling league, and the smell of sausage and maple syrup thick in the air. I put my banana bread on the counter. No one noticed. Instead, my sister swooped in with her usual charm, greeting everyone like a hostess, not a guest. Then it happened. "This is Mireya," she said, introducing me to someone from church. "She's just staying with me for now." My hand was still mid-wave when that sentence finished. Just staying with her. I blinked. The woman nodded politely and said, "Oh, you're renting from her?" I felt the words jam at the back of my throat, like a pill too large to swallow. Callista didn't correct her. She smiled. Moved on. I stood there, pretending the banana bread hadn't gone unnoticed, pretending the room didn't feel 10 degrees colder. I had paid that month's rent in full. Again. And yet, here I was, reduced to just staying. On the drive home, I stared out the window while Callista talked about someone at brunch having too much filler in her face. I said nothing. I focused on the way the trees blurred past, autumn leaves spiraling toward the ground. Beautiful, even as they fell. Back at the apartment, I went to the hall closet to grab a scarf. It had gotten colder. While rummaging through a box, I found my old yearbook wedged behind some unused decor. Dusty, bent at the corners, and filled with pages that once felt like proof I'd been here. I opened to the senior memories section. My stomach turned. There was a photo of our class project, a poster from middle school. My face had been scribbled out in black Sharpie, a jagged line cut through my eyes and name. I remembered that day. Callista said it was funny. A joke. I laughed too, because what else do you do when you're 13 and your older sister says it's not that deep? But now, years later, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a pattern. Like she'd been practicing erasing me long before I understood what it meant to disappear without dying. I sat on the edge of my bed, the yearbook open in my lap. My name had been there, my face too. But they didn't matter anymore. Just like the bills, the support, the car rides, the meals, the quiet favors, they were all invisible until they weren't convenient. I looked around our apartment. Her furniture, my payments, her decorations, my electricity, her comfort, my labor. And I thought, not aloud, but firmly enough to echo inside my chest, if I stopped paying for everything, would I still be welcome here? She had no idea that question was about to be answered, for both of us. By the time we pulled into the driveway, she had already unbuckled and was halfway out the car before I turned off the ignition. I followed, slower, holding the dessert tray with one hand and the bottle of wine with the other. Callista didn't wait for me. She never really did. Inside, the house buzzed with familiar noise, distant laughter from the back patio, silverware clinking in the kitchen, and the distinct hum of someone retelling a story louder than necessary. Mom was in her hosting mode, moving from one relative to another with refilled drinks and half hugs. She glanced my way just long enough to wave me in before greeting Callista with a kiss on the cheek and a, "You look lovely today, sweetheart." I set the tray on the counter, next to a spread of store-bought pastries and a fruit salad that had started to sweat under cling film. No one noticed I brought homemade peach crumble. No one asked. Callista swept through the kitchen like it was her house, offering plates, correcting someone's seating, tossing her laugh across the room like confetti. She belonged here. She always had. I used to think I did, too. As we moved to the dining area, I overheard one of Mom's friends ask Callista, "So how's your roommate?" Her head tilted slightly toward me. I was standing less than 5 feet away. Callista let out a little laugh and answered, "Oh, she's just staying with me for now." My breath caught, just for a second. I stared at the tablecloth, traced the embroidered edge with my thumbnail. Just staying, like a guest. Like someone who'd wandered in off the street, not the woman who'd paid every single month's rent, electric, internet, and even Callista's parking tickets. No one corrected her. No one asked me to clarify. The conversation drifted to something else, someone else, while I stood there, the girl who didn't belong to the furniture, or the address, or the family lore. Back at the apartment that night, I didn't say a word. Neither did she. She dropped her shoes by the door and headed to her room, humming. I sat on the edge of the couch for a while, still wearing the sweater I regretted choosing. Too warm, too soft, too polite. Later, I reached for the remote, hoping a mindless show would distract me. The login screen popped up. My access denied. I frowned and opened the streaming app on my phone. Same message. I pulled up the account settings. A new profile had been created. Us. Not Callista, not guest, just us. But I wasn't part of that us. I was the one still paying for the subscription. I clicked into the billing history, my credit card still on file, charges still going through. The shared password had been changed without a word. I texted her, "Did you change the streaming password?" Her reply came quick. "Thought you didn't use it anymore." That was it. No question, no apology. Just a declaration cloaked in presumption. I sat in the dark for a few minutes. Then I opened my banking app and canceled the auto payment. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. Let her find out the same way I had. Quietly, inconveniently, and completely alone. I closed the app and stared at the ceiling. It wasn't the streaming service. It wasn't even the brunch. It was the buildup. The stack of silences I had swallowed, one after another, like coins in a broken vending machine. You push enough in, you start expecting something back. And when nothing drops, you don't yell. You walk away. I thought about that moment at the table, the way she didn't flinch when she reduced me to a temporary presence. The worst part wasn't the lie. It was how easily it slipped from her lips. I whispered to myself, when people stop pretending, you finally see who they are. And I meant it. It was the smallest lie, but something in me snapped for good that night. It had been 2 days since the brunch. I still hadn't touched the crumble I brought back. Left it in the fridge like a forgotten artifact, untouched and increasingly irrelevant, just like me at that table. I got home that evening after a full day of spreadsheets and phone calls I didn't care about, dropped my bag by the door, and slid off my flats. My feet ached, but not as much as my silence had. That brunch haunted me, but not because it was new. It was the same script. It just stopped feeling invisible. I reheated a cup of coffee from the morning and sat at the kitchen table. I didn't turn on the lights. The glow of the microwave clock was enough. My eyes drifted to the mail I'd been ignoring. On top of the pile was a half-opened manila folder, tax prep materials I had set aside weeks ago. I pulled it closer, mostly out of habit. There, tucked inside, was a receipt from 3 years ago. Callista's name was listed at the top. A professional development course, $2,800. My credit card. I flipped through the rest. Email confirmations, login credentials, PDFs of assignments she barely touched. That course helped her get a job at the community center. A job she held for less than 4 months before quitting because the environment was too structured. She still bragged about it at gatherings. Her certificate, my money, my admin login, my mistake. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. That wasn't the only thing. There were dozens, maybe hundreds, of similar little handouts, each one small enough to justify in the moment. But together, they formed a mountain I had carried alone. Until now. My phone buzzed, lighting up with a LinkedIn message. The name wasn't familiar, but the company was. An old firm I worked for 2 years ago. I opened it. Hi, Mireya. Hope this isn't too strange, but I recently had coffee with your sister. She spoke a lot about you. Mentioned you can be controlling? That you used your money to keep people tied to you. Just thought you'd want to know. Take care. I stared at the message, blinking slowly. My chest didn't tighten. I didn't gasp. I just sat there in silence as the words sank in like cold tea. This wasn't family gossip passed in whispers. This was the narrative she fed to strangers, to people I once worked with. She hadn't just removed me from her story, she rewrote me as the villain. I didn't respond. Instead, I reached for my laptop, opened a blank spreadsheet, and typed a title, What I Paid For. I started listing. Not just the big things, like rent and tuition, but the petty ones too. Grocery runs she never reimbursed, gifts she claimed as hers, vet bills, delivery tips, cab fares to job interviews she ghosted. I dated each entry, attached receipts where I could, labeled every line clearly. It wasn't rage, it wasn't a manifesto, it was a ledger. A quiet act of accounting for all the times I was told, "You're too serious," while I held our lives together behind the scenes. Line by line, I gave weight to what she made invisible. As I reached column Z, something shifted. I paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I knew the next number wouldn't be a dollar amount. It would be my exit. I got the email just before lunch, sandwiched between a grocery store promotion and a reminder about a dental cleaning I had already rescheduled twice. It was short, sterile, and signed by someone I barely knew. Your position has been impacted by the restructuring. We thank you for your service. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my fists on the desk or pace the apartment. I just sat still for a long minute, reading it again. The words didn't sting because they were sudden. They stung because they were familiar. Discardable, replaceable, necessary only until I wasn't. I closed my laptop gently, not out of sadness, but because there was nothing left to say to a machine. I went to the fridge, pulled out a half-eaten salad from the night before, and let the quiet hum of the refrigerator settle into my ears like white noise. When Callista walked in that evening, she kicked off her boots and dropped her tote bag by the door. I was already at the stove, stirring a pot of her favorite soup. It wasn't a peace offering. I just hadn't figured out what else to do yet. I lost my job today, I said, watching the broth bubble. She didn't even pause to process it, just reached for a glass, filled it with tap water, and replied, "Honestly? Maybe it's for the best. You've been uptight since forever." I didn't turn around. If I had, I don't know what would have surfaced in my face. Instead, I turned off the stove, removed the pot, and set it on a trivet. Steam rose like a ghost between us. She took a sip of water and walked away, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I sat at the table and watched the soup cool. I didn't serve it. Neither of us said anything else that night. The next day, I got a text from Callista around 3:15 p.m. "Hey, let's skip dinner. Feels weird to celebrate stuff now that you're between jobs." I stared at the message, reading it again as if context would soften it. It didn't. That dinner was supposed to be a celebration, her professional certification. I had funded the course, signed her up, even helped write the application. I booked a reservation at a cozy little bistro on Hennepin Ave, a place she once said looked too fancy for our budget. I'd budgeted anyway. I showed up anyway. The host recognized me, smiled, and asked if I was waiting for someone. I nodded. 10 minutes later, the smile faded. He asked if I wanted to keep the table. I shook my head and left a tip anyway. Outside, the night air was cool, almost metallic. I walked a few blocks before I realized I hadn't put on a coat. I didn't feel cold, not in a way that mattered. When I got home, Callista's door was shut. Her light was on. I didn't knock. Instead, I sat at the dining table with my laptop and reopened the spreadsheet. I scrolled to the bottom, row 83. 2 new lines waited to be entered. Row 84. Certification course, $1,475.62, paid up front. Row 85. Celebration dinner, canceled, $124.50. Table for 2, party of 1. I stared at them longer than the rest. Not because they were the most expensive, but because they felt like proof of something I had refused to name. I was not part of her narrative. I was only a service provider, until I lost value. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel sad. I felt clarity, and clarity doesn't ask for permission. So I stopped asking for respect, and started calculating what I'd been too polite to take back. It was just after midnight when I opened the banking app on my phone. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet, almost staged. Callista had fallen asleep on the couch again, an empty wine glass balancing on the edge of the coffee table, like even the furniture knew better than to commit. I sat at the dining table, the soft light of the kitchen overhead, humming faintly as I navigated each account one by one. First, I removed her from the grocery delivery platform. No more midnight snack runs on my dime. Next, the family phone plan. My name on the contract, their names on the benefits. Gone. Then the gas card I'd temporarily given her when she got her license reinstated 2 years ago. Deleted. No announcement, no warning, no emoji-laden explanations. I didn't throw a tantrum. I just flipped the switch. By the time I reached the last subscription, her gym membership that hadn't seen a scan since the first wave of the pandemic, it felt like I was brushing lint off a coat I'd outgrown. I put the phone down, took a sip of cold coffee I hadn't realized I poured, and sat there in silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that felt earned. Morning came with fury. My phone lit up at 6:43 a.m. 12 missed calls. First from Callista, then from Mom, then again from Callista, rapid fire, then texts. Why can't I get gas? Is the internet down? Callista's crying. What happened? Are you okay? What did you do? Not once did anyone ask how I was. Not really. They didn't miss me. They missed the money. I didn't reply. I put the phone face down and made myself breakfast. Real eggs, not scrambled in a rush. A whole avocado, not just the half I used to save in a baggie like a fool. 2 pieces of toast, with real butter. I sat and ate slowly, letting the salt settle on my tongue like something earned. That afternoon, as I folded laundry in the quiet, my mind drifted back to a name I hadn't spoken aloud in months. Jacob. We'd dated for 8 months, long enough to talk about holiday plans and whose lease would end first. He had kind eyes, a dry sense of humor, and the rare ability to hold silence without trying to fill it. Until one night, out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you ever think you use money to control people?" The question hit like a misplaced puzzle piece. I laughed at first, then asked what he meant. He hesitated. "I mean, with your sister. She said you like having her dependent, that it gives you power." That was the night everything changed. He didn't accuse me, he asked me, and I didn't have an answer. Because back then, I hadn't yet realized that love shouldn't cost invoices and silence. Back then, I still thought keeping everyone afloat would buy me space on the boat. We drifted after that. The breakup wasn't dramatic. He stopped texting back. I stopped asking. But now I knew the whole script had been ghostwritten. She didn't just sabotage my bank account, she sabotaged love. And still, I didn't call Callista to confront her. I didn't forward her the LinkedIn message. I didn't dig up old screenshots. I simply grabbed my laptop, slid it into my bag, and pulled on a sweatshirt. On the walk to the library, I didn't think about money. I thought about facts, and how truth, when written clean and cold, doesn't beg to be believed. It just sits there, waiting. Not a diary, not a revenge note, just the facts, lined up like quiet witnesses. The library wasn't crowded. It rarely was on a Saturday right after lunch. That's why I chose it. Just a handful of students, a retiree reading the paper, and a kid in the corner watching a video with the sound too low to disturb anyone. My kind of crowd. I picked a seat by the window. The light was good, and the outlet worked. I took out my laptop, cracked my knuckles, quietly, out of habit, and opened the spreadsheet. The one I'd started at the dining table in a fit of painful clarity. The one titled, "What I Paid For." It wasn't revenge, it was housekeeping. I created a new tab and began drafting an email. No subject line yet, no message body, just names. I filled in the blind CC line with relatives, family friends, a few contacts from Callista's job search days. Anyone who ever sent me a text saying, "You're so lucky to have each other," or commented on a Facebook post, "You and Callista are sister goals." They needed to know the ledger, even if they didn't want the story. One by one, I copied and pasted the transactions. Rent, tuition, medical copays, even a plane ticket to our cousin's wedding she bailed on, but insisted we split. I added context where it mattered. April 2020, vet bill for her dog's surgery, $967. I was furloughed that week. I didn't editorialize. Just the facts. Quietly arranged, like evidence in an old court case no one thought would be reopened. I paused for a long time before pressing send. Not because I doubted it, but because silence had always been my currency, and I was about to bankrupt it. Then I clicked. Watched the screen refresh. If anyone wanted the truth, they had it now, in Excel format. I leaned back in my chair and stared out the window. The trees outside had started to turn. Not quite orange yet, but not green either, like they couldn't decide what season they belonged to. I understood that. As I packed up, my phone buzzed. Low storage warning. I opened the voice memo app, figuring I could delete a few old files. One at the bottom caught my eye, dated from last fall. I didn't remember recording anything then. I hit play, expecting a pocket full of static. Instead, I heard Callista's voice, clear and smug. She thinks money makes her superior. Honestly, I can't wait till she breaks. There was a pause. A faint laugh from someone else. Her friend, maybe. She walks around like she's this selfless martyr. I mean, yeah, she pays, but only because she needs us to need her. My fingers hovered over delete, but I listened again. Once more, just to be sure. It didn't sting. It didn't even shock me. It confirmed what I'd already buried. I deleted the file, not out of grace, but because I didn't need it. Hearing it didn't hurt. It just reminded me that sometimes the worst wounds don't bleed. They repeat. Back home, I opened the spreadsheet one last time. I scrolled to the bottom and added a new row. Emotional labor, 7 years, unpaid. I closed the document, uploaded it to the cloud, and gave it a new title: Truth, Archive, Final. Then I shut the laptop. If you don't write your version, someone else will. And mine had just begun, with dates, decimals, and the tone of someone who wasn't asking anymore. By the time I stepped through the front door that Sunday, the apartment felt foreign. Not unfamiliar, just stage-lit, like everything had been rearranged for show. The scent of Callista's lavender diffuser hung in the air, too deliberate to be accidental. Her voice didn't greet me. Neither did her footsteps. She was in the kitchen, sipping a green smoothie with one hand, scrolling through her phone with the other. "Hey," she said, not looking up, like we were still pretending to be civil roommates. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. The email had gone out 12 hours earlier. Everyone had received it. The ledger, the dates, the receipts. It was no longer just my burden to carry. It was public record. Callista hadn't mentioned it, but the stiffness in her shoulders gave her away. Her usual breezy confidence had dulled, like she couldn't decide if silence was safer than explanation. I walked past her, grabbed a bottle of water, and headed to my room. On the way, I remembered the emergency joint account, one we'd set up years ago after Mom had a minor surgery, and said it was time to think like grown-ups. I opened my laptop and logged in. The balance didn't shock me. What did was the withdrawal from 3 months ago, $12,000. Not a round number, not medical-related. I pulled the statement. The memo read, "Vendor deposit, inventory purchase." I stared at it for a moment, trying to recall any mention, any discussion. There had been none. A business, apparently. One I never heard about. An Etsy shop, I'd later learn, that never launched and had no license. She didn't ask. She just took. Because she assumed I wouldn't look, wouldn't question, wouldn't dare. It wasn't just the money. It was the arrogance that I wouldn't notice. I closed the account, transferred the remaining balance into my personal savings. Then I printed the statement and set it aside. Later that evening, while clearing out my nightstand, I remembered something else. My mother's necklace. A small heirloom, nothing extravagant, but precious. She had told me it would be mine. Verbal, yes, but promised nonetheless. I opened the drawer where I had kept it since she handed it to me in a soft cloth pouch after our grandmother's funeral. What I found wasn't what she gave me. It was a knockoff. Tarnished chain, fake stone, the clasp already starting to rust. I blinked. Opened the drawer again, searching. Nothing. I sat back on the floor, heart oddly calm. Then I remembered a photo Callista had posted on Instagram last month, captioned "Timeless Elegance." The necklace in the shot looked familiar. Too familiar. My hands didn't shake, but my breath shortened. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and held the pouch out to her. "This isn't the one Mom gave me." She didn't look surprised, just shrugged. "Maybe you misplaced it?" I met her eyes. "You posted it last month." Now she did pause. "You're always so obsessed with what's yours." There it was. The truth not in her denial, but in her deflection. I set the fake necklace on the counter, turned and walked to my room. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't make speeches. I just packed a duffel bag, 3 outfits, toothbrush, laptop, wallet. Callista watched me from the hallway but didn't speak. The smoothie still in her hand, melting like whatever was left between us. As I zipped the bag, I glanced at the spot where the necklace had been. If home is a battlefield and my love was mistaken for ammunition, then I withdraw my weapon. Because the real heirloom wasn't a necklace. It was the lie that I still belonged here. The forwarded email came late afternoon. Subject line, "Thought you'd want to see this." The sender was a woman I barely knew, friend of a friend from church, or maybe a committee meeting years ago. I clicked it mostly out of boredom. It was a flyer, glossy and proud, for a local nonprofit's upcoming gala. I wasn't listed, but Callista was. Her name sat boldly on the honoree list, for her tireless service and generosity supporting women's financial literacy. I blinked at the screen, scrolled down. There it was again. Callista Holt, listed under major program sponsors. The footnote said, in honor of her personal contributions and leadership. My mouth went dry. They toasted her using receipts I kept in a manila folder. That program? The donation? That was me. Years ago, before I knew better, I had written the check, drafted the mission proposal, and submitted the documentation under our family name. I thought we'd do it together. She ghosted the first planning meeting, then took credit in silence. The gala was set for Wednesday evening. I RSVP'd as quietly as I could. I didn't dress up. No heels, no shimmer. Just black slacks, a soft blouse, and my laptop bag. Like armor for a kind of war no one names out loud. The room buzzed with local personalities, small business owners, retired teachers, donors with legacy pins and loud voices. I sat in the back, near the coat rack, far enough to be invisible, close enough to hear everything. When Callista's name was called, applause rose like steam from a boiling pot. Loud, eager, unearned. She stepped onto the stage in a silk wrap dress I once lent her for a funeral. She looked every bit the part, polished, poised, rehearsed. Her speech was familiar. In fact, it was mine. Phrases pulled directly from the original mission statement I wrote. She had changed maybe 4 words. A slideshow flicked to life behind her. Photos of group events, workshops, panel discussions. I remembered all of them. I'd taken most of the pictures, but in each one, I was cropped out. Once, my hand still lingered in the frame, resting on a table corner, cut off at the wrist. It was like watching my own life performed by someone with better lighting. She closed with a laugh. We lift each other, right? We don't keep score. The crowd laughed with her. I didn't move. Not when she left the stage, not during the raffle announcements, not when someone offered me a glass of wine I politely declined. When the lights dimmed and dessert was served, I walked up to the reception table and asked for a program. Back at home, I scanned the page, opened my email, attached the PDF to the thread labeled What I Paid For. No caption, no summary, no emotion. They wanted a heroine. I gave them the invoice. Because silence might be graceful, but facts don't stutter. A week had passed since the gala, but the tension in the air hadn't thinned. It had just changed shape, become quieter, sharper. I returned to the apartment late in the evening, not to speak, not to explain, but to collect what was mine. Callista opened the door with her arms crossed. She didn't look surprised. She didn't ask questions. She didn't move aside either, just leaned against the frame like a guard who had already read the list of visitors and knew which ones weren't staying. I stepped in without waiting for her to offer. The apartment still smelled like the same vanilla candle she always burned too close to dinner. But something else lingered. Maybe fear, maybe resignation. Her silence wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of someone preparing for damage control. I walked straight to my old room, gathered the files from the drawer, the external hard drive from under the desk, and the receipts I had saved in a Ziploc behind the dresser. Nothing more. I didn't glance at the books I left on the shelf. I didn't check the closet. On the dining table, I placed a folder labeled, For Your Records. Inside were printed copies of the email I'd sent to the family, the one with dates, payments, and the proof no one had asked for, but everyone had received. Callista watched me from the hallway, her arms still folded. Still playing the victim? She asked, her voice calm, like this was a script she'd rehearsed. I zipped my bag and turned. No, I just stopped acting like I wasn't robbed. She flinched, barely. That was enough. I left without slamming the door. Let it shut on its own, soft, final, like a drawer that no longer holds anything of value. From there, I drove to my father's house. The porch light was on, though the curtains were drawn. He opened the door before I knocked. Maybe he'd been watching. Maybe he expected me. Inside, everything looked the same. Same mug rack by the sink. Same recliner with the side worn smooth from habit. He offered tea. I nodded, but I didn't drink it when he set the cup down in front of me. We sat for a while, the television buzzing low in the background, broadcasting a baseball game neither of us followed. I came to return this, I said, placing the house key on the table between us. He stared at it, then looked down at his hands. I knew what she was doing, he said finally, his voice low, but I didn't want the family to fracture. I didn't nod, didn't speak, because what was left to say? Some truths don't wound. They confirm what you already bled for. He didn't apologize. I didn't ask him to. I stood, collected the half-closed box I'd brought in, and walked to the door. They weren't losing a daughter, I thought, as I stepped outside into the chilled evening. They were losing their accountant. And now that the audit was over, I could start investing in someone they never met, the version of me that didn't need to be useful to be loved. The bank lobby was too quiet for a Tuesday. It smelled faintly of printer ink and something lemon-scented, but not quite clean. The kind of place that presented calm like a wall, neat, flat, unmoving. I stepped up to the counter and gave my name. I'd like to close all joint accounts associated with me, I said. Specifically, anything still tied to Callista Holt. The woman behind the glass took my ID, glanced down at her screen, and nodded slowly. There's one account still active, she said, but there's also a note. Would you mind stepping into the manager's office? Just a formality. I didn't flinch. Of course. A few minutes later, I was seated across from a man I'd seen once before, during a refinance meeting for our parents, years back. He smiled politely, offered water I declined, and tapped a few keys. There was an addendum submitted about 4 months ago, he said. A notarized document declaring shared ownership of property purchased or maintained under joint funds. Co-ownership, legally filed. My stomach tightened, but my voice didn't shake. I never signed such a thing. He turned the screen so I could see. There it was. My name, typed neatly. Signature at the bottom. Not mine, but close. Close enough to fool a glance. Not enough to pass scrutiny. She hadn't just taken money. She'd forged a future, one where she'd claim things I built. She didn't just want help, I said aloud. She wanted legacy rights. I asked for a printed copy, thanked him without emotion, and left. My heels clicked across the tile as if nothing had happened, but something had. Something irreversible. On the drive home, I stopped at a gas station, pulled out my phone, and opened my banking app. I wanted to check one last charge from earlier that year, one she'd marked emergency medical. It had always nagged at me, especially since it coincided with a dramatic night when she'd sobbed about Mom being rushed to urgent care. I remembered sending the money, no questions asked. I scrolled back to the transaction. The merchant name didn't look like a hospital. I tapped it. A betting site. A gambling platform linked to a company her boyfriend once tagged in a social post. I checked the timestamp again. Same day, same hour. She'd cried into my voicemail, and I'd wired $3,200 without blinking. They built a tragedy, so I'd open my wallet. I pulled over into a church parking lot, fingers trembling, not from sadness, but from the precision of the betrayal. Every lie had scaffolding. She didn't improvise. She constructed. By the time I got home, I had already filed 2 fraud reports, one with the bank, the other with a private attorney I knew through a co-working group. I uploaded all documents, signed what needed signing. Then I opened my email, attached the forged ownership form and the betting receipt, and sent them to one address, my father's. Subject: for context. Body. In case anyone asks why I walked away. I didn't wait for a reply. I didn't expect one. I didn't need a response to validate facts. This time, I wasn't reacting. I was documenting. Because money lies, but math never does. And my math was finally louder than their fiction. It was late Sunday morning when I unpacked the last box. I'd been avoiding it, half dreading what it held, half forgetting it existed. It sat in the corner of my new apartment like a sealed memory. Nothing urgent inside, just bits of paper, old receipts, bookmarks from places that didn't exist anymore. And in the middle of it, an envelope with my handwriting. The seal was still intact. My name on the front. Callista's address in the corner. The return stamp never torn. I knew immediately what it was. A letter I'd written to her years ago after one of our bigger fights. I don't even remember what started it. Something about money or boundaries or the latest crisis she'd called me selfish for not fixing fast enough. Back then, I believed that apologizing first meant maturity, that reaching out was love, that if I wrote it down, maybe she'd see the weight I was carrying. I slipped the envelope open. One page, typed, signed at the bottom in blue ink. I'd chosen words carefully. I'm sorry for not being more patient. I know I can come off too rigid. I just want us to be close again. Reading it now, I felt a pang of secondhand embarrassment. I wasn't writing from guilt. I was writing from training. Trained to make space. Trained to take blame. Trained to be the bigger person, even in a room where I was the smallest one. I whispered aloud to no one. I apologized for breathing too loudly in a room where silence was expected of me. I folded the letter slowly and placed it back in the envelope. Then I reached for a Sharpie and scribbled across the front. Unsent truths. For a brief moment, I considered burning it. But some proof, I realized, should exist, even if it was never acknowledged. That letter wasn't just a plea, it was a timestamp, evidence of who I used to be. I pulled out a blank sheet of paper and began writing a new letter. This one addressed not to her, but to me. No more proofs of love that cost you your self-worth, I began. No more silent rescues dressed as grace. No more waiting for someone to notice the weight in your arms before they offer to carry it. I didn't cry. I signed it, folded it neatly, slipped it into a folder labeled Current Documents, because this version of me wasn't unfinished. She was still being written. I laced up my shoes and stepped outside. The air felt crisper than it had in weeks. I walked without a plan, just down the block, past the bakery that always smelled like cinnamon, past the mailbox where I used to drop rent checks for a home I never truly lived in. At the end of the street, a child crouched on the sidewalk, chalking uneven hearts in pink and yellow. Her mother called from the porch, "Not too close to the street, honey." I kept walking. A man with graying hair passed by, nodded and said, "Lovely day to start over." I nodded back. Not because I agreed, but because I already had. Some stories don't need revenge. They just need one final line, and the courage not to rewrite it. The call came on a Tuesday, just before lunch. I was refilling the copy machine at the nonprofit, balancing toner and paper trays, when my cell vibrated on the corner of my desk. Unknown number. I picked up anyway. Old habits. Ms. Holt, this is Darren Milton with Stonegate Financial. I'm reaching out about a flagged loan application. I didn't react. My voice stayed even. What kind of flag? A co-signed document. It references your name, but there's a discrepancy with the signature. We were hoping to verify a few details. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. Email me the document. It took 5 minutes. When it arrived, I opened it slowly, like someone unwrapping a letter bomb. I recognized it instantly. A modified version of a letter I'd written for Callista 2 years ago, back when she couldn't qualify for her apartment lease alone. Only this one was digitally altered, with my name moved, retyped, my signature lifted and repasted. The wording had changed just enough to make it read like I had backed a personal loan. $8,500. Unsecured. The date? A month after I moved out. Even after I left, they tried to borrow my name. I searched my old files, pulled up the original PDF, complete with the timestamp, headers, and email trail. I forwarded it to the investigator without commentary, just facts. I didn't want revenge, I told myself as I hit send, but I did want a record. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. Callista's name. I let it ring, then a text, then another, then silence. I didn't block her. I didn't delete the messages. I just didn't reply. The next morning, I walked into the office earlier than usual. The light was soft through the windows. I set my coffee down, nodded to the new intern at the front desk. She reminded me of myself, 5 years ago, before I learned that being useful wasn't the same as being loved. That afternoon, between back-to-back meetings, I opened the What I Paid For file one last time, scrolled down, added one final line. Forgery defense, $0, not my debt. Then I hit print. I framed that single page and hung it above my desk. It read, balance, 0, peace, priceless. I didn't cry, didn't grin. I just breathed, fully, deeply, like there was finally space in my lungs for something new. And in that breath, there was room to begin again. They couldn't erase me. They just reminded me why I had to rewrite myself, on my own terms. Sometimes, the hardest battles are the quiet ones, the ones where you don't scream, don't fight back, but instead step away with your dignity intact. That was mine. And maybe it's yours too. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Don't confuse being indispensable with being respected. You can pour your time, your money, even your soul into people who never saw you as more than a service provider. And when you finally step back, the silence will speak volumes. To anyone watching who's been the invisible one in their family, the fixer, the giver, the one who held it all together, I see you. And I want you to ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped begging for acknowledgement and started living on your own terms? Have you ever walked away not out of anger, but out of clarity? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below. Drop a 1 if this story touched your heart. Or tell me where you're watching from. If you didn't connect with the story, I'd still love to know why. Your voice matters here. And if this video resonated with you, if it reminded you of a truth you've long buried, please consider subscribing to the channel. That way, you won't miss any of the stories we tell next. Because these stories aren't just mine. They're ours. And they deserve to be heard. End of Fan Kuoi.